Hi, and welcome to SoapUI Pro webinar, where we'll introduce the version 5.0 features for SoapUI. We have three features to discuss. One of them is specific to Pro, API discovery feature that I'm very, very excited about, and hopefully you'll understand why once you see the feature in action. We'll also talk about two other features, such as we'll talk about OAuth, and we'll talk about REST mocking feature that is now available in version 5.0. That's definitely a big milestone in mocking and visualization of web services. So to really focus, to start off the version 5.0 feature, the first feature we'll focus on is API discovery. In some literature it may have come across as REST discovery, but it's definitely something that we want to improve on to capture all APIs, so SOAP, REST, etc. And in improving our coverage of REST APIs, one thing we found is the limitation that REST APIs aren't as descript as SOAP. So of course, without the WSDL, without a proper descriptor, we don't have a good way to know exactly what the API does. So we've added REST discovery feature, which captures traffic that you generate and then creates interfaces against the captured traffic and creates test cases for you against the captured traffic as well. So this is very useful in cases where you already have a web service client and a REST web service implemented together, and you can generate traffic by, activating the client, so by either browsing the website, by browsing a program that runs, communicates with the web service behind the scenes. Also, if by any chance you've already implemented some sort of solution to test your APIs, maybe you've written some custom scripts to call APIs, you can then call that solution, run it, and then capture the traffic and port that traffic into SoapUI test cases. So again, very excited about this feature. You'll hear me talk a lot more during this webinar about this. As I mentioned, we can definitely capture traffic that's sent via browser, via mobile apps, and it's not even limited to that. Like I said, it may also apply to programs to communicate with devices, to other scripts to communicate with web services, etc. So with REST discovery, you'll see it in action. We can automatically record and save traffic and then generate resources. Based on that, we'll populate the full payload, we'll populate the HTTP headers based on the requests, and we'll also capture traffic sent back, and I'll talk about that in just about a minute as well. Another major feature that we have now introduced in version 5.0 is REST mocking. So we were able to mock up SOAP web services many versions ago. So, this is something that we've definitely implemented for years, literally. So now that we see REST coming up more and more in implementations in the need to test, there's also more of a need to virtualize and mock up REST services. So now in version 5.0, you'll see we've implemented a quick ways where you can create stubs against resources that are called on your REST mock service, and you can either manually edit the responses, or you can also create some dynamic scripts in there, just as you could with creating mock SOAP services. So now this feature is available. I've already found it very useful in troubleshooting certain payloads that come back. I can very easily simulate this with the REST mock service now. Also, if by chance you have some third-party APIs that you're dependent on, or maybe you pay access for, and sometimes you need to access your APIs to talk to those third-party APIs, you can mock up that traffic and use a REST mock that you can stand up now within SoapUI version 5.0 instead of really relying on those third-party APIs to be up to make your program functional. One thing that we've come across in coding version 5.0 is the two features that I've talked about actually work really well together. So you can do discovery of your traffic, and then we can now in version 5.0 in SoapUI Pro, as we do discovery, we can capture responses, and out of that we can generate a REST mock service. So that's something that you'll see is very easy to do, and it captures actual traffic, actual live data, and then you can make that simulated data for the reasons that I've already mentioned, such as lack of reliance on third-party APIs, or maybe on your REST web service that you may need to test. Maybe your developers bring it down all the time, but you still need to keep creating tests. So again, you can keep the web service up by mocking it and then keep generating tests against it. So as I mentioned, you can tie these two functionalities together, and you'll see me do that in my demo that I'll proceed to in about 2-3 minutes. And as I mentioned, so you can tie this in, and when you don't have a way to define responses that come back from your REST web service, again, because most of the time there isn't a descriptor, we can just capture the actual responses for you and create a REST mock. So you'll see me go through these actual steps where I will right-click on the interfaces that we auto-generate with REST Discovery and stand up REST mocks directly from that. The final feature we'll discuss today is now in SoapUI, both open source and pro, we now support configuration for OAuth 2.0. So if your web services are protected by OAuth 2.0, or if, for example, a third party is looking to integrate with you and that third party is now protects their web services through OAuth, you can do a lot of configuration in SoapUI to both call those web services and to automate the calls to those web services. So that's also something that we'll talk about. One thing to mention now is we're changing our authentication a little bit in this version, and we'll introducing profiles. So later on, right now in version 5.0, we introduce profiles for different OAuth credentials, but later on we'll roll everything up to profiles. So basic authentication, all the other types of authentication will roll up to profiles in version 5.1 and further versions that we'll release. And the last bullet point also mentions something that's very important. We will support OAuth for automation. So we did still leave room for you to put in some script to automate the call of the web service and to still provide your credentials within an automated test case of SoapUI. All right, so that was actually the PowerPoint section of it. So now we can step within the SoapUI Pro tool. So here you can see that I have version 5.0 up that we've released on April 9th, so just about a week ago. And I've prepped a completely blank project called API Discovery. Now I can take this project and discover REST services. So I can right-click on the project, and currently I have to go to this Discover REST Resources menu in the right-click menu for the project, and that will launch REST Discovery window within SoapUI Pro. You can see we have two options. We can start browsing here within an internal browser that we've also upgraded in SoapUI Pro. This is in the side for kind of the more technical people attending, but we've upgraded our browser to JavaFX. So now JavaFX will support HTML5, JavaScript, all the latest rendering functionality. But sometimes if you do find a delta and you have the very latest website that you're testing and doesn't quite render correctly, you can always discover your traffic, do a discovery of your traffic based on the proxy. So you can see that in the dropdown we can switch from an internal browser to a proxy, and then we set up a listener on a specified port. We'll give you all of the connection details for external clients, for internal clients, that you can set up a proxy on. So for internal clients, for example, I can set up my Chrome, my other browsers to go through this proxy that I'm highlighting in blue. For external clients, we can set up the information for external connection that I've highlighted in green that I'll also underline. So for example, for a mobile app, I can set it up for this specific host. And then I'll capture all of the traffic that then will go through that proxy. Um, but kind of to proceed with our actual scenario, we'll go to an internal browser, and here we can browse actual traffic within SoapUI. So this way you don't have to rely on other browsers. So what I will do is I'm actually going to browse to a Swagger page. So as I mentioned, REST APIs are often undocumented, but we do have, but you know, there are descriptors available for REST API. Swagger is one of the front runners of what's available, and we could always import Swagger definitions through a SoapUI plugin. But here, what you can do is take it a step further. So you can actually browse to a Swagger page. So here's an example Swagger page that has the operations listed for a pet store, right? So even just browsing to this page, you can notice that we were able to record 31 requests. We don't actually want these requests yet because you know, this is just the download of a page, but we can filter that, and that's something that that I'll show you in just a moment. Also, as an aside, and I apologize, I didn't mention this at the very beginning of my WebEx. If you have any questions about any of the functionality I'm presenting, feel free to use the questions tab in GoToWebinar. I do have a colleague of mine, Giscard, who's also very well versed and up to date on the latest features. So if you ask your questions in the questions tab, while I'm doing a demonstration of the features, Giscard can handle those questions and provide you the answers in there. Okay, so proceeding with our example. So we went to a Swagger pet store descriptor, and here we can see the descriptions for all of the different functions that are available. We can see that there's a function that is available for adding a pet. So if you do a post here, you can add a new pet to pet store. So let's look at that function. So here you have to post JSON, and you know, just from working with this web service before, I know that it's basically expecting this JSON that I'm pasting in. You can see it's a pet with ID 123 with a certain category, and we'll call it SoapUI Pro Pet. I'll just be more verbose and call it V5 Demo. So we'll do a post, and now we can click Try It Out. You can see that will increment the recorded requests right here. Okay, so as we click Try It Out, the recorded requests are now 33, and we just captured the post that we sent in. You can see that we submitted this request, and the response was 200. So we successfully added pet 123. Now we can go back to the page, and we can do a get. So we can find this pet that we just added with the ID of 123. So I populated the ID, I click Try It Out. You can see that incremented recorded requests again to 34, and we were able to post to this URI. So you know, the domain /API/pet123, and that responded with the details that were against which we created the pet. Okay, so so now we're basically done. I was able to create a pet. I was able to get a pet. So now I can hit done. And actually, before I do that, also note this recording feature. So by default, this button is pressed, meaning we're recording traffic. Sometimes you may want to stand this up and actually unpress it, browse directly to the environment where you want to capture traffic, and then press it and record the traffic based on your actions. So this is kind of a useful tidbit as you know, as you work with this. But now we've captured everything, and we can click done. So here's a representation of all of the traffic that came in. Okay, and just also to make this clear, so here I'm using Swagger as an example. I can do the same thing against any website, against any web form for internal browser. It's absolutely not limited to Swagger. And likewise, I can even do this against mobile devices, against other traffic that I generate in any other way if I send it through a proxy. Okay. This just to clarify some of the questions that were asked in the questions tab. So anyways, we recorded that traffic. Now we're presenting all of the traffic that was recorded. So here are all the domains where we send and receive traffic. So you can see that we sent some stuff to Google, and we sent most of the stuff to the pet store, right? That's really the stuff I care about. So I can just leave the domain for the pet store checked, and I'll uncheck, and I won't really care about other traffic. Now, in the pet store, you can see we still have a lot of stuff. So we downloaded images, we downloaded CSS files, JavaScript files. We don't want that. We really care about the response that came back in JSON. So we have another way to filter the responses, and that's through content types. So based on the content type HTTP header in the response, you can filter the responses. So as I mentioned, you can uncheck everything. So for example, I don't care about, images like GIF, PNG, CSS files, HTML. I just care about the JSON, the responses that came back in JSON. Okay? So now by leaving that checked, you can see that we've now filtered this down to 10 responses. So here's now the descriptor. So this is the resource descriptor. So we call petstore/swaggerwordnik.com/API/pet and /API docs. I remember that when I clicked try it out, it went against /pet. Okay, so I really care about these two responses: a post where I created a pet, and then a get where I got the pet with ID 13. So these are probably some descriptive stuff that came back from Swagger. So I can uncheck this too. So this as well, and now I have the 2 steps left, and I can hit generate services, and that will create an interface against these services. And in addition, you can also create an interface, or as we call it here, services, plus test suite. This is the option I want to check right now. And once I click OK, you can see that I'm prompted to create a test suite and prompted to create a test case. So if I did this API discovery for a project that already had some test suites and test cases created, I would be prompted to add these steps, either as a new test case or as a brand new test suite test case, or add them to an existing test case. I would have all of those options presented to me. But now by clicking OK, you can see that we've successfully done our REST resources. We'll close this window, and we created an interface. So now we're able, so this is the section of SoapUI that describes how these calls are made. This is what we call the interface, with the resources, with different fields that were sent in. And based on that, we even created a test case. So the test case is the sequence, right? So here we have first a sequence where we posted and created a pet, and then we got a pet with ID 1 to 3. And now here in these test steps, we can actually apply assertions, and we can start making things dynamic. So here, for example, you can see that we have the request sent in, or the payload with the same ID 1 to 3 with SoapUI Pro Pet V5 demo that you remember that I added in the page and that I captured. So now I can get the success. I can quickly add assertions in SoapUI Pro by right-clicking on the outline view and say, this message element should always come back. So I can quickly generate XPath against it. This should always be a success. Hit save, and now I can always validate it. Right, so now with this test case, I have the automation piece. I can validate it. I can always recreate it based on the traffic, right? So it's not based on me kind of trying to figure out how the web services work, building each interface in SoapUI, building each test case. It's actually capturing the traffic, filtering it based on content, so filtering out all the images, all the HTML stuff out of the test cases that I want to capture. And just focusing on the stuff that matters, and then adding assertions, adding validation, adding in, ability for me to automate things. So hopefully this section alone kind of made sense. But not only that, now I can talk about REST mocking, and as I mentioned in the PowerPoint, this ties in directly. So we have an interface here at this level of the project that I'm highlighting. Sorry, give me 1 second, that I am highlighting in blue. So this is the section of the interface, right? And this is an example request when we create a pet, right? Actually, let's do this for the second one where we get the pet, right? So now this is the request, you can see that we are looking for pet 123 that we captured in the resource of the URI, and this is the response that we received. Okay, so right now it's rendered in the outline view. If you use open source, you'll see raw view where you see the JSON that came back. You'll see JSON view, available for you as well. So now we can take this response and create a REST mock service. That action is as easy as right-clicking on the request, and now in SoapUI version 5.0, you can say add to REST mock service. Since I don't yet have a REST mock service in the project, I'm prompted to create REST mock service 1. I'll say OK to that. And right now it's using a default port that's actually in use. So it's port 8080, and I have something stood up on that port. And you'll see me change that port and quickly stand up the mock service as well. So that was the reason for that pop-up. But now, if you're familiar with SOAP mocking, now we have REST mocking. So it looks very similar, where we have a REST mock service that is highlighted in blue and also has a blue icon. So if you've used SOAP mock services, you have had a green icon before. Okay. Then you also have kind of the operations level that match the resource. So in this case, the resource, your URL after the domain needs to be /API/pet/123, and then within that resource we'll provide a response. Currently we have a single response captured, and it's this. So it's JSON that came back in a single line, because that's how it was formatted originally. So right now we do have some formatting for XML, and we are working to add more functionality to dealing with JSON, so do be on the lookout for that in the next couple of versions. But at the moment, here's the JSON where we again return SoapUI Pro Pet v5 demo, and that was such a long name, and I can just completely change it for the mock service and say, again, I'm not very creative, so I'm not going to name it Fido or Max or anything like that, so I'm just going to go pet name from mock. Not creative, but very descriptive. Okay, so now we can go to the mock service, go into the options icon right here, and this is where I can change the port. So if you remember when I created the mock service, it used the default port that had the port conflict. So I will change this to port 1212. It goes to my machine, click OK, and now I can run the mock service to listen on the configured port 1212. Okay, so now we can go back to our original request, and right now this goes against a live web service. Right now, imagine, God forbid, my internet goes down completely, but I still need to create tests. Right, so now I can actually point to my machine, so we'll point to localhost port 1212. We still have the same resource that will match against the mock service, and now you can see I am getting my pet name from mock service that I configured in the mock service. So here are the responses that come back. So now I can start manipulating them, and now I can keep calling my tests against the mock service, and I can keep writing my tests against it. So I'm now not as dependent on the actual API being up to create my tests. Okay. So so hopefully this makes sense. So again, at this point we've covered API discovery, how we capture HTTP traffic. Based on that capture, we create test cases. We capture the responses. Based on that capture, we create REST mock services. I see there's very good traffic on the questions tab in GoToWebinar, and again, Giscard is doing a phenomenal job answering everything, all of the questions that come in. There's also a good question asked there regarding the recording of this WebEx. So this WebEx is being recorded, and if you reply either to the WebEx email or contact your account rep within SmartBear, who's helping you out with SoapUI Pro product, we'll provide the recording for you shortly after this session. Okay. So I also received a question regarding setting up a proxy. So in REST discovery, just to kind of be very clear about it. So when we do discover REST resources and then we stand this up in a proxy, This is set up in SoapUI Pro, right? So now you need to set up a proxy in another browser or in another application. So how to set up a proxy, how to set up that other application to go through a proxy will matter on that other application. But if I remember this correctly, in IE, which less and less people use now, you can go to Internet Options, and then see, I'm forgetting this myself, so I think it's Connections, LAN Settings, and then you can say Use a Proxy, and then I can send everything through this proxy. So again, this is an example for IE. This will differ for different applications. So you can do a very quick Google search for Firefox, for Chrome, for other browsers, for other applications as well. So, but that end will depend on the application where you send the traffic from. All right, so again, we've covered API discovery. I think, I've talked to Erof about it. I am very excited about this feature. Hopefully now it makes sense why. And I'll quickly talk about OAuth 2.0. So you may have heard a lot about OAuth. Now you can actually configure OAuth in SoapUI to be supported out of the box. So here's an example of our Google Maps project. And we've created this before this feature was offered, but I've taken that project that you can find in SoapUI.org. And in this simple test, I've gone into a test step where I can get a distance from Boston to New York. Now, in Google, Google has kind of its own OAuth set up as well. So you can see I've used this before to get a token retrieved from the Google server. But if you start this completely fresh, this whole section will not exist. So you will not have a token retrieved for you. Excuse me. Sorry, my voice is going. Give me 1 second. All right, thanks. So to get started with OAuth configuration, first of all, you should create a profile. So here I've created a Google login profile, and you'll have an option to name that profile. Later on, you can add new authorization, create another profile. So this in the future will support all different types. So you can see NTLM, basic auth, etc. At the moment, for OAuth 2.0, you can click on Get Token section here. So this is actually clickable, and that will create this pop-up. So then you can choose OAuth flow. So there are two called authorization code grant and implicit grant. And again, the actual flow of OAuth authentication will depend on which application you're connecting to and how they set that up. But in this case, for Google, I actually had to go into my Google profile, go into developer settings, get client identification ID. Then I needed to find an authorization URI, so where I can send this ID, and then a redirect URI, so where I will be redirected after I authenticate. Now I can click Get Access Token, and that launches another a JavaFX browser that's still a SoapUI page, right? So you can see that this is still a JavaFX browser within a SoapUI tool, where I am now prompted to log in with my credentials. So I'll just use my Gmail credentials. So this is my email, but still, if you do want to connect with me, I would suggest you use LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect with our SoapUI users. And I'll provide my password, which fortunately Google encodes. I just need to not mistype it. And click Sign In. So one thing to note is if you want to automate this, you need to find out the actual name of the username and the password, like domain object model, the actual object within the HTML page. And same with the sign-in page. So note that. You can then click on Sign In. And now you've signed in. Behind the scenes, you may get sent to a redirect page. And now you'll have an access token. So in OAuth, you probably, if you're very familiar with it, you'll have a redirect flow as well. So all of that will be available for you. But now I have my token, and I can send in my request, and you can see that I can get the response. So in kilometers, there's 346 kilometers between Boston and New York. So, which makes sense. Takes about 3 hours and 40 minutes to get back. So, but the important thing, so here in the raw request, you can see that we sent in this authorization token in the HTTP header. So now that section is done directly in the auth get token field. I've mentioned that we also added an option to automate it. So this is also in this get token page. You can click on, instead of clicking on get access token, you can click on automation. And if you remember, so if I click get access token, that prompts me for the username and password. And I mentioned that you need to find out the object names of your username, your password, and your, the page you click. You can then write quick JavaScript, tied with jQuery. It should be very easy to just find that object and either populate it with your username, password, and do the click in this login screen. If you ever need to do a consent screen, so if after you log in, you have another OAuth screen saying, are you sure you want to log in with your credentials? And you're sure you just want to automate it and you don't want to click yes, I'm sure every single time, you'll then need to write another JavaScript that finds that yes, I'm sure button and automatically clicks it for you. And I apologize that I didn't quite prep this scenario better with the actual JavaScript, but the problem is I would have to expose the actual password in JavaScript. So hopefully, me describing this functionality will enable you to automate OAuth login. So with that, we've really covered API discovery, REST mocking feature. We've covered OAuth 2.0 support. I see there's a lot of questions in the questions tab. A lot of them were answered. A lot of people are asking for a replay of this webinar, for a recording of this webinar. So for those who joined late, the recording of this webinar will be available and will be shareable. So either reach back out to the webinar email alias where you got the invite from, or in a better way, even reach out to your account rep who's potentially handling SoapUI Pro either trial or account, and we'll provide you with the webinar recording after the fact. Otherwise, kind of looking through the questions, it looks like most of them were either answered or, or it may be very particular to a use case. So to your use case. So again, if you have any questions regarding this functionality, I know it looks great in the demo, and it hopefully this really makes sense to you and this is clear as day. But then once you get to configuring this on your end, if you have any questions, likewise reach back out to us. If you have technical questions, if you have a pro license, log it with SoapUI Pro support. If you don't, try SoapUI Pro, download a trial, get the get a look at our Pro features, and as part of a trial, we'll also try to enable you to get past the hurdles you may encounter. So hopefully this was really useful. As I said, any questions, shoot to account reps, shoot it to support, ask on the forum on SoapUI Pro forums, and thank you all for attending. Thank you all for your interest. And hopefully you have a very good rest of your day. So I know we scheduled an hour, but hope you have extra 25 minutes now back in your day, courtesy of SmartBear software. All right. Thank you all again for your attendance.